Welcome to Remembering You, a space for slowing down, seeing again, and gathering the parts of yourself that the world asked you to forget.
Each week, we wander through stories, ancient, personal, and collective, to explore how perspective changes everything. How what we look at and how we look can open doors to who we truly are.
Take a breath, feel your feet.
You've arrived.
Let's begin remembering you.
I know that is probably different than your version of contemplative practices. This is more philosophical in nature.
Welcome, friends. Thanks for being a fly on the wall. We are going to try to eat the elephant today with one bite.
Oh boy.
I hope you have what is it called? That the jaw disconnects and then opens up all the way back.
Whoa, we're embodying the snake today?
There's a name for that, where the jaw it's like double jointed.
Unhinges and
yeah, and opens up. So Alice-Ann just said that we are going to talk about contemplative practice through the lens of Ken Wilber and spiral dynamics. We aren't going to spend too much time camping out on spiral dynamics, but it's interesting. If you're familiar with Ken Wilber and any of his work, he is an incredibly gifted, I would say, synthesizer.
yeah, very much so.
He's able to lock himself in his room for years, digest incredible volumes of content, and then be able to lay it on top of each other, like all of the layers, and see how everything connects. So if you're coming from a classical view of the contemplative way or contemplative practices, this may drive you a little bit bonkers. And in my personal unfolding, and I would say the step of order, disorder, and as I was trying to find reorder in the way that I related to my inner world and outer world in my late 20s, Ken Wilber started popping up. Folks like Rob Bell, author, pastor, speaker, artist. Father Richard Rohr was spending a lot of time at Integral Theory, which is Ken Wilber's organization. Folks that I looked up to and deeply impacted my life were a part of the unfolding genesis of Ken Wilber's spiral dynamics. So that is a little bit of background just from my experience and perspective. And although maybe a little bit begrudgingly, submission to the term contemplative in this conversation.
Well, I feel curious how it's different from, like, what is the traditional practice of contemplation as you have been taught? And
contemplative comes from a Christian mystical perspective. Contemplative practice is the intentional cultivation of silence, attention, and receptivity that helps us become aware of and also participate in the presence of God already within and around us.
Okay.
So we're going to come at it today, and Ken Wilber comes at it from a perspective that one of his lines that I absolutely love, transcend and include. He is transcending the concept of God and including the concept and the construct of there is no God within his model.
Yeah.
And so from a classical perspective of contemplative practice, he's missing the equation from the perspective of it's connecting with the God within and also without through slowing down
Yeah.
an experience. And there's a bigger umbrella that Ken Wilber is holding for us, or we could say a bigger container where God outside of construct and concepts, ideas, that's the contemplative practice that he's inviting people into.
Mm-hmm.
And that rings very true in my experience.
Yeah. Yeah, like he's following sort of the philosophical contemplative way. Like, for example, Socrates famously said philosophy is essentially training for death.
Mm-hmm.
And that it is a way of, it's not just we're going to think about ideas in some abstract kind of armchair, just sitting here thinking thoughts all day. It changes us. It challenges our beliefs, and it challenges how we feel about all of the ideas that we hold and the emotions that we experience and the experiences that we have. And it's trying to say, it's like a training to challenge yourself at every step of the way. How is it that you actually know anything at all? And in what way can we, like, if we flip it on its head or if we turn it sideways, and what is it, like, in the way that you respond to what it is that you think, or like in the way that you feel about what you think, what is that showing us about the belief that you have and how you interact? So it's a very participatory, like, you're engaged with the world. It's a deeply spiritual experience, although many philosophers are secular, and some of them are even, like, famously atheist, and yet they are, I think all humans are drawn in many, many, many different ways to this level of our experience. We're just trying to understand the world and ourselves and our relationships. So,
and as a mystic, I would say that experience is the way. Like, that is the path.
Yeah.
That is
right. Yeah.
The knowing. It's experiential from the inside out.
So a few weeks ago, Integral, Ken Wilber's org, he no longer has a physical location. It shut down shortly after COVID, unfortunately. But he still has a big online website and courses and resources. And they sent out an email on one of his frameworks that he developed back in the 90s about Holons. And
spell that for us.
Holons. Holons. And it's got 20 different tenets baked into this whole framework. And I learned about the framework, I don't know, 15 years ago maybe. And it was one of those where I was like, oh yeah, that's interesting, and that's interesting, and that's pretty cool. But I didn't really think very deeply about it. And I knew that, like, as I was reading it, I would get little kind of like just these little physical, felt, emotional, it's like, I don't know that I believe that. Like, something about that doesn't quite seem right. But I don't know, I just didn't have the curiosity or the interest to actually feel through it. And when this email came out, I was, again, reading through the tenets, and that feeling of, like, a puzzle piece not fitting into place happened again. I was like, what is that? So I just got curious about it. And as I was trying to figure out what that sense of dissonance was telling me, I realized, like, oh, this is what I am doing is the philosophical one of the ways of doing a philosophical contemplative practice. And it's a super interesting framework. Like, the ideas in it are kind of radical. And so I thought it would be fun to both talk about the framework, like, what does he mean by a holon, and then also talk about sort of like a real-time, this is what contemplative practice can look like. And it's a really important part of one's, to borrow a phrase from Dr. John Vervaeke, ecology of practices, like the hygiene that we all need to engage in, like, in the same way that we need relationships and friendships, and we need perhaps physical exercise and engagement, and we need ideally meditation or some kind of, like, practice where we get real still and quiet. And so this is just part of an interconnected set of practices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's start off with a couple definitions
Sure. Yeah.
of some terms.
Yep.
Consciousness.
Oh, geez. God, we are turning into a snake and eating the whole elephant with one bite, aren't we?
Consciousness is the presence or knowing of experience.
I like that definition. Yep.
Awareness. We have teachers that like to mix consciousness and awareness in the way that they throw the terms around.
Yep.
Awareness, often used synonymously with consciousness, just to be aware that we may be saying awareness, and that is in the same vein as presence or knowing.
It is something to be like you. You are having an experience right now, and so is probably everyone listening.
Cognition.
Yeah.
Information processing, thinking and reasoning. Cognition. Intelligence. Capacity for learning, problem solving, and adaptation. Self-awareness. Awareness of oneself as an individual or subject.
Awareness of oneself.
Self-awareness.
As an individual. Yep.
Metacognition. Awareness of one's own thinking and mental process. Complexity. The degree of differentiation, organization, and integration within a system. Complexity. There may be some other definitions that we need to pull out as we roll through.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
These 20 tenets.
Okay. Very cool. So should we talk about how Wilber came to create the framework itself?
Please do.
So the word holon was coined HOLON, a whole that is simultaneously a part of a larger whole. So think maybe Russian dolls. That's one sort of way to imagine a holon. Like the interior dolls are simultaneously their own thing, but they're also part of the larger doll. So it was coined by a gentleman named Arthur Koestler, Koestler, in a book he wrote in 1967 called Ghost in the Machine. And Koestler was trying to bridge the gap between reductionism, which only looks at parts, versus only looking at wholes and systems. So he was trying to find a bridge. He's like, there's got to be sort of a middle path. Then Ken Wilber in 1995 wrote this enormous tome of a book called Sex, Ecology, and Spirituality. And he took Koestler's concept of holons and expanded it into the 20 tenets that we're going to talk about. And Wilber was attempting one of his massive projects, was not the first one that he had done, where he was synthesizing modern evolutionary biology and systems theory with developmental psychology and Eastern philosophies, specifically Sri Aurobindo's evolutionary spiritual vision and Plotinus's Neoplatonism, which is a whole bunch of big words. And so essentially he was trying to pull together some of the latest understandings in Western psychology and science with more ancient Eastern traditions. And his goal was to show that evolution is not just a physical happening. Like evolution doesn't just happen at the physical level, it's also happening at the spiritual level. And his main premise is that it's moving from matter to life to mind to spirit. So he's kind of creating a trajectory, which I kind of have problems with. So that'll be one of the things that we talk about. It reminds me a lot of Rob Bell's Everything is Spiritual talk that he gave. It's very, I mean, it makes sense that Rob Bell was into Ken Wilber because they both are. It's kind of like Rob Bell was putting his own spin on, in a very, very fun way, on what Ken was saying. Hey, Alice-Ann here. So after Ryan and I recorded this episode and listened back to it, we realized it would probably be really helpful if we gave you a full overview of Wilber's 20 tenets before you heard us discuss them and kind of pick them apart. So here's the overview. Tenet number 1, reality is made of holons. So not things and not processes, but kind of like both, whole parts together. So everything that you can name is a whole in and of itself, and it is also part of something larger. So the cells in your body are both whole individual things in and of themselves, and together they create organs and tissues and bones and everything else that makes up your body. Also, an individual thought can be thought of as a whole thing in and of itself, but when we string them together, they can create stories. So the claim is that holons exist at all levels and all layers of the human and non-human world. Tenet number 2 is agency and self-preservation. So each holon works to preserve its own wholeness, its own pattern, against the pull of everything else. Like a cell in your body works to stay a cell. A marriage wants to stay a marriage, until it doesn't. An economy works together to stay an economy. A planet, an ant, absolutely everything. Third tenet is communion and self-adaptation. So each holon adapts and bonds with other holons at its own level. So cells in our bodies bond with neighboring cells, and then they form tissues. Families come together to make up communities. Countries trade with other countries, and those create economic and political systems. So holons come together, they bond, and they create other things. Tenet number 4 is eros, the drive to reach up, to become part of a greater whole than the one that it currently belongs to. So this is a way of describing the drive or the force that was behind tenet number 3, that movement for our cells in our bodies to bond with neighboring cells to form tissues, or the way that families make communities, or for countries to trade with other countries and create economic political systems. So if tenet number 3 is describing the what, tenet number 4 is describing the how. Then tenet number 5 is agape, or self-embrace. This is the generous drive downward to enfold or to nourish what came before it. So this is a way of describing the drive or the force that's behind tenet number 2, which talked about agency. So if an individual cell wasn't preserving the other organelles that are within it, it couldn't maintain its agency as a cell. Tenet number 6, holons emerge. Novelty is real. So new wholes genuinely appear where they were not there before, and you couldn't necessarily predict them from their individual parts. So for example, when hydrogen and oxygen come together, water is formed. Water has, for example, wetness, a property that neither hydrogen nor oxygen has. So therefore, something new can emerge when 2 or more wholes come together. Tenet number 7 says that all of this emerges holarchically. So each new whole arrives on top of the last in a sequence. So cells cannot come before molecules. And so this is just to say that the order of things matter. Your heart, for example, requires specialized cardiac cells. A sentence requires words. You can't just jump from the raw letters of an alphabet to create a whole story. First you need words, and then you got to make sentences, and then you can make a story. Tenet number 8 says, each transcends and includes its predecessor. So the new whole goes beyond what came before while embracing it entirely. So a cell, when it becomes a cell, doesn't destroy the molecules that makes it up. It depends on them to continue existing. A family unit doesn't destroy the individuals within it. Hopefully. Otherwise, it would not be a very healthy family. A solar system doesn't destroy the individual planets in order to become a solar system. Tenet number 9 says the lower sets the possibilities and the higher sets the probabilities. So what came before defines what can come next. So chemistry is the substrate that biology depends on. And the higher level, so to say, is governing what the lower levels can do. So for example, your cognition, the fact that you're in a body, both of those things are working together with an intention that you might have to move the molecules within your arm. Tenet number 10 says depth and span are defined. Essentially, they're the number of levels that a holon contains determines whether it is shallow or deep. The number of holons on a given level is its span. So essentially, all Wilber is doing is defining his terms. He's naming that there is breadth and depth that is present within this framework because he is going to talk about these next two tenets that depends on this definition. Tenet number 11 says that at each level, there is greater depth and less span. So every step up holds more within it, and because of that is rarer in the universe. So atoms, for example, are everywhere. They have low depth but very massive span. But beings like us are not everywhere. We have very high depth and very tiny span. Tenet number 12 says the greater the depth, the greater the consciousness. So an interiority, a feeling of what it is like to be something, or the thing that we generally call consciousness, that arises in this framework from depth. So more holons enfolded within means more awareness looking out. Tenet number 13 says that if we destroy a level, we lose everything that's above it. So if you destroy any type of holon, you destroy every holon that's above it, but none below. So for example, if you destroy all molecules, the cells that make up those molecules would still exist, but the human body would not. Or if you destroy all of the bonds that are holding your marriage together, you as individuals will still exist, but the marriage will not. Tenet number 14 says holarchies co-evolve, which is a way to say that individuals never rise alone. Each holon evolves alongside the collective that it belongs to, which pretty deeply challenges our Western notions of individualism. So individual wholes cannot evolve in isolation at every level of the universe. So for example, flowering plants, pollinating insects like a bee, those didn't evolve separately and then just kind of bump into each other. They co-created one another. Human brains couldn't evolve without the language and the tools also evolving around it. Tenet number 15 says the micro is in a relational exchange with the macro at all levels of its depth. So each layer is trading energy or information or physical matter with its own kind. So atoms with atoms, minds with minds. And if you starve one exchange, then that level will suffer as a result. Tenet number 16 says there is increasing complexity. Over time, holons of greater intricacy appear. The universe trends towards more and more complexity over time. So we move from very simple hydrogen gas to stars, which then create molecules, which then create cells, which then creates brains. We have 4 more tenets, and in these last 4, Wilber is going to switch perspectives a little bit to include some complexity that we find in more nuanced branches of science and human developmental psychology. This is Ken Wilber doing what Ken Wilber does best. You are either going to love it or hate it. One could make all kinds of arguments whether or not he actually needed to do this, but here we go. Tenet number 17 says that there is increasing differentiation and integration. So growth divides into new parts and then binds together into a larger unity. So for example, an embryo differentiates itself into distinct organs, which then eventually creates or integrates into a single body. In evolution, a single species might divide into distinct specialized species, which then integrates into a balanced food web. He then acknowledges that if you break either the differentiation or the integration process, you get a pathology. So if you interrupt an embryo's process of differentiating its distinct organs, you're not going to end up with a healthy human being. Tenet number 18 says that there is increasing organization and structuration. So loose aggregates, like let's say a pile or just a random collection of hydrogen atoms, they give way to a genuine structure, a pattern that holds and does something in the world. So chaotic floating gas clouds will come together to form highly organized solar systems eventually, or raw organic chemicals will self-organize into structured cellular machinery that maintains order against entropy. This tenet, you could argue, is really just a combination of the third tenet of communion, which says that holons bond together with other holons at the same level, and tenet number 6, which says that holons emerge to create novelty. But the reason why Wilber is doing this requires kind of a complex discussion that solves for specific problems in systems theory, which Ryan and I do not go into. So if you want to better understand why Wilber is doing what he is doing, read his book, Sex, Ecology, and Spirituality. Tenet number 19 says that there is increasing relative autonomy. So each level holds its own identity against a wider range of shocks. So in a sense, there is more freedom within more relationships. This is following from the previous two tenets. So if something has differentiated and integrated, that then allows it to increase its organization and structure, which then provides it a sense of stability and autonomy. So as an example, a dog is quite reactive to its physical environment. For example, the doorbell rings and the dog will just bark and bark and bark its head off. You as a human who in this model possesses kind of more holonic differentiation and integration and complexity, you have more capacity to understand that the doorbell is not a threat in a way that a dog does not. That is not to say that a dog can't learn that, but it is a much bigger challenge for the dog than it is for a human. And then the very last tenet says that there is increasing teleos, that each holon is drawn toward its own next wholeness. So this is like a pull, pulling it forward, not just a push from behind. So if tenet number 17 says that life increases its differentiation and integration, that is like a description of what is happening. Tenet number 20 is a description of why it's happening. He's saying the universe is not just blindly churning through mechanistic combinations and complexity, that in a sense it is being pulled toward something more whole. It is a metaphysical line in the sand that says everything is being guided by spirit. So that is the 20 tenets. Please enjoy our discussion. Thank you.
So examples of a holon.
Mm-hmm.
So we could, just by way of giving word picture, if you think of a Russian nesting doll.
Yes.
There's a big, and inside there's a smaller, and inside there's a smaller, and inside there's a smaller, each of these nesting dolls.
Yeah.
And that is giving us an idea that there is a whole and there are parts that are also wholes within the complexity of the largest Russian nesting doll.
Mm-hmm.
We could also, within the human body, we could say that we're made up of atoms.
Yep.
And then molecules,
Mm-hmm.
and then cells,
Mm-hmm.
and a whole mess of organisms.
Yep.
And then we have a nervous system.
Yeah.
And ultimately that all adds up. Each of those wholes, each of those individual systems are a part of a big system being the human body.
Mm-hmm.
So he's correct on
Yes.
the physical
Right.
level.
Yes. Well, except so I think he's pointing to something that's really important. I think what he's inviting his reader to do is to recognize the way everything's all interconnected. And it's too simplistic to say that it's just a bunch of individual, because nothing is actually isolated at all. It's all deeply impacted. And it would also be not helpful to say everything is just a big system, because it's too complex. It's too, it is really helpful to understand, for example, the nuances of what an individual cell is doing. Then we can look at mitochondria and, we can do all kinds of fancy science. So we do need to understand individuals. But I think there's a way in which I think that tension between the seeming individual versus the system, that is a duality that is, you can't neatly, he attempts to neatly resolve it with his creation of the idea of a holon. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but I also want to be very careful to not just absolve ourselves from feeling the inherent tension between an individual and a system that it's a part of and the way that they interact with one another. Like it's a duality that is fundamentally what the entire universe rests on. Like it is what creates existence itself, is that interplay between all dualities.
So that would be our premise.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I guess it's not that I think he's wrong. It's just the idea can be a little slippery in that he's creating a new concept that then allows us to perhaps not preserve that tension between the individual and the collective that it's a part of.
Say more about the tension. What is their tension?
Like
What is the tension?
there is a very old debate in philosophy and in science about things and processes. And so lots of philosophers have written tons and tons about it. But essentially that structure, the stable entity of the thing, and whether that thing is an actual physical object or whether it's like a thought or an emotion or a like momentary experience, so it doesn't have to just be a physical thing, that that stable entity itself and the dynamic flow of the ongoing relationship are complementary to one another. I think our mind tends to want to have, like, there's a mystery in it, in that relationship between the individual and the process, between the thing and the collective. And I guess I don't want to. Holons it's such a tidy, neat little concept that within myself, I notice a kind of relief when I hold on to the idea, oh yeah, reality is holons. And so it gives me a way to feel a kind of satisfaction, but then I kind of lose the mystery between the thing and the process.
Okay.
Like, inventing the third way of looking at it does not erase the polarity between, and I'm not saying that that's what he's trying to do. I'm just noticing my own tendency to like to have things wrapped up in a nice and tidy package, especially when it's kind of a mysterious thing like this. And so that's all.
Okay. I can see that.
Yeah. And then, of course, we could take the whole non-dual perspective and say, well, it is neither. Like, wholes and parts are just categories that we create.
Yeah.
And then so would holons. But that's... But they're useful. We do need labels for things to navigate life.
Growing up, my parents had some friends that went over to Germany, and while they were in Germany, they got an old German cuckoo clock. My parents still have it to this day, and I remember the first time I looked inside and saw all of these gears and was just blown away at the intricacy, and it was a mystery as to how they got all of those gears into that small little space, and they're all working together, and the weights at the bottom are giving the tension and moving the gears just a little bit. And I never wanted to take it apart. I did want to watch the insides move. As a kid, I wouldn't have had the language of, if I can meet the engineer or if I can meet the clockmaker, then I'll be able to ask them questions and kind of get inside their head and their perspective and their understanding. There wasn't that awareness. Today there is, because as an adult, I understand that somebody with an incredible mind and engineering experience put that clock together that all of these probably 40 years plus down the road, it's still keeping perfect time in a masterful way. And each gear is a Holon, and it's a part of the larger system.
So we could say, like, the Holonness of something. Holonness is not necessarily an inherent physical substance that's like built into the universe. Of course, this is just a concept. It's more like it is a feature of how we are looking and how we are categorizing the layer that we're looking at. So, like, if we speed time up quickly enough, a very solid, stable thing like a mountain could become a slow motion process of tectonic movement that looks more like a wave than a stable physical object. Or like if we zoom out far enough, our whole entire life might look like just a frozen singular snapshot in time and space. And so the Holon, the Holon is just it's a reflection of what perspective are we looking at the thing through. Like, how close am I? How quick am I?
Am I able to see all of the other pieces and parts that are interacting with it, or that are inside it, or that it's inside?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So if tenant number 1 is the universe is made of Holons, tenant number 2 is agency or self-preservation. So each Holon works to preserve its own wholeness, its own pattern against the pull of everything else, which is kind of just basic evolutionary mechanics or agent dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
That every organism, so to say, requires some kind of survival function in order to maintain its, signature pattern within this space-time continuum that we're all living our lives in. So whether that's a tree or the shirt on your back or the chair you're sitting in or the family unit that you're a part of, like everything is trying to preserve, at least for some amount of time, its expression.
What do you think the problem was that Wilber was trying to answer with this model?
Well,
What was he responding to?
He was building off of Kessler's. So Kessler invented the term Holon, and he was just further trying to refine exactly what that means. And he was, because he's essentially trying to answer the question. Well, you could frame it lots of different ways. One of them is, does matter create spirit, or does spirit create matter?
Mm.
And his answer is basically that there's a kind of so we'll see later on in the thing that he has this notion that very complex things like humans have a deeper kind of consciousness than, say, a rock. And so that as things get more complex, they have more consciousness, and there's therefore more spirituality, so to say. So in a way, he's saying matter creates spirit, which the further I got down into the tenets, the more and more my little feeling that there was a puzzle piece out of place got more intense.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's kind of his overarching question that he's wrestling with.
I think specifically focusing on the Holons and what is his purpose of defining, using the Russian nesting doll illustration. Why is he working so hard and spending so much time pointing to the individual is perfect, complete, beautiful, nothing lacking, and it's a part of a whole that is perfect, complete, nothing lacking? And where I would take that, my assumption is that because the Western way of looking at anything is, well, science studies the exterior world.
Yeah.
And psychology studies the individual interior.
Yep.
And sociology is studying group, think, and interactions and institutions.
Yeah.
and religion or religious institutions are exploring meaning, consciousness, transcendence.
Mm-hmm.
So Wilber is taking each of these disciplines and saying they're not in contradiction or in competition with one another,
Yeah.
but they're actually all together in a harmonious, symbiotic relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like the Western mind trying to heal its own fragmentation,
Mm-hmm.
which is a really beautiful drive to be guided by, because he grew up in the West just like you and I did, and probably most of our listeners. And, like medicine, for example, all of your doctors, they have a super, super, super specialty. Like they are focused on a very narrow part of the pie. And so there's a way in which we have a deep preference for cutting things up into the smallest little slices, as opposed to Eastern philosophies, which are much, much more. They look at the collective and the whole. And so it's essentially that tension between the East and the West perspectives, and he's trying to knit them together. And we know he's an Enneagram 5. So he's the quiet specialist who is deeply driven by that need to understand and that need to know, which brings a lot of, it kind of eases. I think we all have an internal anxiety of some kind. Like there's something within us that we're trying to resolve in our own unique way. And for his type, it's really, really deeply investigating large bodies of knowledge and trying to find how they all fit together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the third tenet is communion or self-adaptation. So each holon is adapting and bonding with others at its own level. So like molecules join other molecules, atoms join other atoms, humans bond in marriage to other humans or in friendships. And so wholeness and individualness all pulling at once, which is just really excellent systems thinking. Like nothing is existing in a vacuum. We are all intermingling, and we do this very naturally, both at the physical level and the emotional and the spiritual and whatever other level we're not mentioning. So I'll group the next two together. The fourth tenet is on eros, which is self-transcendence, and then the next one is on agape, which is self-embrace. So eros is the drive to reach up, to become a part of a greater whole than the one that it belongs to. So in the way that, a molecule will join with other tissue and they'll create a whole organ, or, two people will come together and then they'll create a whole family. And then agape is that generous drive downward to enfold, to nourish what came before. He also says that when agape is dysfunctional, it sort of devolves into thanatos, which is like a destructive force. And so these two are where I have my first biggest So yes, at some level I can align to the felt desire to reach up, to belong to something greater than myself, or part of a greater whole. Like, I want to have a friendship community. I want to have meaningful work that I belong to. And I also can recognize the drive to sort of reach down, so to say, and nourish, to be of service to something without any thought of being paid. It's not a transactional experience. But there is a built-in hierarchy to both of those ideas. So to think of evolution as a kind of ladder that we are climbing is almost a little bit too neat and tidy. And it feels more, I think what is more true is it's more like a web that just explodes out in all directions. And even within our own lives, like we are not just a neat hierarchical ladder. Like our own development is an absolute mess, and it is not linear. And sometimes we move upward, and then sometimes we fall right back down. And sometimes we move more in one direction, and then we shift into another. And it's not always like progressive, so to say, in a good direction. But just because things are devolving, that also does not mean that it's bad. Like there is a destructive force, might feel really bad and might look pretty catastrophic in one moment, and then recognize later that actually that was the rich soil that I sprouted some new kind of perspective from or some new life from. And so it's a little bit too linear and a little bit too neat and tidy. I'm not saying it's not true at a level. It's just a little bit too simplistic. It kind of caused my inner detector to be like, yeah, I don't know. I'm curious what you think.
My assumption is that everyone is going to define transcendence in their own way. And so I think your definition of what your experience of transcendence, I think that makes sense based upon your experience.
Yeah. It's not like there's a right way, in other words. Yeah, absolutely. And I think I guess the meta thing that I think is important to notice is there's a way in which we can hold on to our understanding of something or our feeling of like being really right, and not like we can grasp onto that too tightly. And so are we willing to look at it with more curiosity or with more openness, or consider a way in which it could shift or change?
I would say that the drive to reach up is a normal, natural experience as a human. And it evolves from information and knowledge that we gather over our lifetime, and through experience turns into or blooms as wisdom. And so the way that we relate to our reaching up in the first half of life is going to be different than the second half of life.
I like that. How would you translate that to the outside world around us? Like, let's say a tree or an ecosystem or a star. Like, because of course what Wilber's trying to do is communicate a universal experience for everything in the universe.
So you're saying his premise is everything is alive?
Well, he's saying everything has some version of
consciousness.
Well, of eros or agape. So not necessarily consciousness. Like he would not say that a rock is, or at least that if it is, it has some very simple version of consciousness. Proto-like consciousness. So I assume maybe
everything has programming.
Yeah.
We have DNA.
Yep.
So we could say so we start off with information. I have facts. And then through time, knowledge is I understand what those facts mean. Understanding unfolds from that. I see how they relate to the larger whole. And ultimately, wisdom is my way of being and acting. And my way of being and acting is transformed by my experience of the information, the facts that I've lived out or that I've embodied or that are part of the whole. So whether that's a tree or a squirrel or the lichen growing on the tree that the squirrel's eating.
Or the atoms that make up the substances within all of that. Because, of course, atoms, some are attracted to one another, others are repelled. They have electromagnetic bonds. Okay, I like that. His next tenet is that holons emerge, in a sense that novelty is reals, that new holes genuinely appear where they were not there before and couldn't necessarily be predicted from the parts themselves. So that essentially things are coming together all the time to create something new. So when hydrogen and oxygen combine, water emerges, and that emergence has novel properties that that hydrogen by itself or oxygen by itself doesn't have. That when you put the two together, you get something new. And his next tenet says that they emerge holarchically, which is to say that each new whole arrives on top of the last in sequence. So cells cannot come before molecules. So in a sense, there's kind of an order of rendering. There's an order of complexity. Particles have to form atoms, and then molecules have to create living cells, and then those cells create organs and other tissues. The eighth is that each transcends and includes its predecessor. So the new whole goes beyond what came before it while embracing it entirely, so that nothing is thrown away. And I think on a physical level, this is pretty sound. Like a cell will enclose and preserve its molecular substrate. It doesn't destroy that part of itself when it becomes something greater. However, I don't know that this applies as neatly to like human psychology or culture or all systems at all levels. So, for example, our psychological growth is rife with experiences of not transcending and including. Like sometimes parts of our experience are fragmented. We repress stuff that we don't want to think about that's too painful. I mean, we do have genuine loss. And there is a need to like actively deconstruct perhaps a structure that is way too rigid from like a cognitive perspective or an emotional perspective. And then also from a metaphysical perspective or from a spiritual perspective, like it's treating spirit as the very top layer that's built on top of matter, as opposed to like what feels more true for me is that metaphysics is kind of the substrate of everything. Like that's what's at the like spirit is at the ground from which we are growing from. So anyway, this one, like, yes, transcend and include is a process, but it's not necessarily a universal one, is what
I like Ram Dass, his statement of loving the dark thought.
Yeah.
It's not rejecting it or pushing it away.
Yeah.
It's also not building on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
And there are definitely experiences that I've had in my life that were positive until they weren't. And then it was time to let go of whatever no longer served. And so, I can see what you're pointing at here.
The ninth one is that the lower, so to say, sets the possibilities and the higher sets the probabilities. So in a sense, what comes before defines what can come next. So for example, the more fundamental layer of chemistry predetermines what biology can evolve from it. So for example, like, if you only have hydrogen and hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen, that's going to predetermine what kind of biological structure you can create from the chemistry that you have available. And he's saying that the senior level governs what the juniors can actually do. So your intention, like let's say I want to move my arm, myself as a quote unquote higher level governs what my physical chemistry or my physical biology is doing. So like if I decide I want to move my arm, I can do that. Of course, there's all kinds of ways in which I can't control my biology. So this is another one that like I think it holds up from certain perspectives and then kind of breaks down in others. Like there is dual causation in the sense that chemistry enables biological possibilities and that mental intention can govern physical molecules like the top-down control. But I don't think it is right to say that physical matter is the foundational substrate that enables consciousness. Like my capacity for consciousness does not arise from the chemicals at a physical level that have come together. It's kind of a materialistic perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The 10th one is that he defines depth and span. So the number of levels that a holon contains determines whether it is shallow or deep. And so the number of holons on a given level is its span. So he's just depth and breadth is all he's saying. He's just saying there's depth and breadth, which I don't have any problem with. But it's so he's setting up what's going to come next. So the next one is that each level has greater depth but less span. So every step holds more within it and is rarer in the universe. So atoms are everywhere, but beings like us are not.
Ooh, I like that.
You like that one? Say more.
Just the idea of our capacity to take in information or hold attention gets, I don't want to say smaller. I'm going to use the picture of a light, a spotlight, going from a floodlight being very wide and shallow to, like if you put a floodlight over the ocean and it's flooding the top, like it's not going deep.
Yeah,
it's just staying on the surface level. And as you zero it in and direct it to more of a pinpoint, it's going to go deeper in the ocean.
like a laser beam.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like that word picture.
I do too. So his next one says, the greater the depth, the greater the consciousness. And this is the one that I think I have the most problem with. So he's saying a feeling of interiority, a feeling of I am, arises with more depth. So more holons that are enfolded within means more awareness looking out. And I am deeply uncomfortable with anything that puts humans at the top of some special hierarchy. Not only because it's such a slippery slope from an egoic perspective, but just I like Donald Hoffman's perspective more in the sense that my experience as a human is entirely dependent on the senses that I have. I have sight, I have sound, I have taste, I have smell, I have touch. We know that, for example, there are other creatures much quote unquote lesser than we who have a kind of a vision that we can't even comprehend. They have way more cones and rods. They can see colors that we can't even imagine. We know that birds can feel the magnetic poles and move accordingly. We can't feel that, or at least most humans anyway that we know of can't. So there's a way in which I can never imagine or experience like what a bat experiences with its use of echolocation. To say that my human experience has more depth and therefore more consciousness seems just absolutely absurd to me.
Mm-hmm.
It feels just like a very egoic, it just makes me feel special. And of course, we all like that. But a tree, like we are learning more and more and more about plants and trees. And at every step along the way, it's like they have a different experience, but that does not mean that it is less than.
Mm-hmm.
And so this one just strikes me as it's just way too narrow. Is all.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Are there any, whether it's in the Bible or otherwise, are there any spiritual teachings you've integrated that speak to this from a spiritual perspective?
Speak to what specifically?
The either consciousness or the human experience in relation to the world around it, and the degree to which it is or is not something special or more deep.
From the Abrahamic religions, there is a metaphor that I draw from many experiences as the people of God feel a calling, and their response to that invitation is to go up on top of a mountain. And on top of the mountain is where the thunder, the fire, the clouds, and after receiving what they need to receive, then they always come back down. And that's where the integration really starts. Moses is probably and then like the Apostle Paul and his road to Damascus, that pattern of going up the mountain is broken, and the individual is in everyday life and experience, and Moses notices the burning bush and is curious and walks over to this bush that's on fire but not being consumed and receives a message from the divine. And the Apostle Paul, who was Saul at this moment, was stopped by an angelic presence and rendered blind from the experience. And then he had to figure out what it was going to be like. He was instructed where to go and what to do, and he had to wait in order for his sight to return. Moses went to his family and found support and comfort in the experience of having support. Or number two, Aaron, came alongside him and helped him unfold the message that needed to be presented to the Pharaoh in relationship to the children of Israel and them leaving captivity and entering the promised land. So with the metaphor of the mountain, there is a climbing to the top, and you can't go any further. You have to wait. For Moses, he couldn't go any further as a shepherd in his experience. He had to turn around and go back to Egypt. Similar for the Apostle Paul, he had to stop because literally he could not see anymore until the unfolding or the integration of his experience was full or complete. It's also a part of the initiation process that we see through the Greek gods, all of the mythology, Native American, Southern Hemisphere peoples and cultures. All of their myths have to do with somebody going away and kind of coming to the end of themselves, or coming to the top and then having to descend and return. So I can see where Wilber is coming from here.
As far as like from a human perspective, the depth and the way that creates kind of more consciousness, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. For Moses in the burning bush, God was there all along. He just hadn't stopped to recognize it and experience it.
His next one says that when you destroy a level, you lose everything that's above it. So, for example, if we destroyed our biosphere, humans wouldn't be able to exist. Or if you destroy all the cells in your body can't exist. So I think it holds up from a physical perspective. I am less sure about, I don't think we can destroy consciousness or awareness. And so it, from I think a neuroscientist would say, well, we know that when certain parts of the mind are injured, let's say you have a stroke or you have a brain tumor or some kind of head trauma, like we know that when we destroy certain parts of the brain, our capacities, our awareness changes, and sometimes very drastically. And so it's not to say that there isn't any kind of physical connection between consciousness and physical matter, but I think the kind of the mystics would say there's a deeper substrate there that can never be destroyed. Like there's you in your physical body as this momentary experience, say, of myself as Alice Ann. Like there's a way in which that is impermanent, but that is grounded on a deeper kind of awareness and presence that is, for the lack of a better word, infinite. The next one is that holarchies evolve, essentially that each holon is evolving alongside the collective that it belongs to. That an individual can never rise all on its own, which I think is probably true at every level. There really is no pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of thing. Like that's just a delusion. Yes, of course, we do need to engage at an individual level. That's not to say that we can just sit back and coast and evolution will take care of it for us, but that we're never solely responsible. The next one is The micro is in relational exchange with the macro at all levels of its depth. So each layer, so atoms trade with atoms, minds trade with minds. If you starve any part of that exchange, the whole level that it belongs to will suffer. And of course, we see that at all layers of ecology and within a family and within a friend group and within government systems. Like, I think that's the health of the connections between the individuals and the systems that they're a part of directly impacts the health of the system as a whole. The next one is increasing complexity. So over time, holons of greater intricacy appear, and that arrow, in a sense, is not an accident, which is a very Rob Bell kind of thing. The only thing that he doesn't ever either in this would have been, I think, the appropriate place to talk about entropy or destruction or collapse. Like, nowhere in his framework is there room for the way that things fall apart. So he's saying increasing complexity, but of course we know that entropy is a baked in part of the universe, that everything falls apart, everything dies. And so that's kind of my only critique.
Mm-hmm.
And that we need that. I mean, it's just death is a part of life, and
Mm-hmm.
there is no light without dark, and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is increasing differentiation and integration. So growth divides into new parts, then binds into a larger unity, and if you break either in half, you're going to get a pathology. Which I don't, at some level, yes, that may absolutely be true. There are ways in which we can break things and that causes them to not work so well. But to pathologize all breaking of things or division, like deconstruction, well, like we just said, deconstruction is part of the engine of life. And so it is not just a pathology or a disease. Number 18 says that there is increasing organization and structuration. Structuration? I don't know if that's a word. That loose aggregates give way to genuine structures. Essentially, that there are patterns and they hold and they actually work, which, it's like we see that at all. I don't have any issue with this at all. Like, there's all kinds of ways in which self-organizing systems within the physical realm create genuine structure and have pattern to them. And we have two more. 19 is that there is increasing relative autonomy. Each level holds its own identity against a wider range of experiences. And then we experience more freedom within more relationships. Increasing relative autonomy. Yes, in some ways. And then also, like, am I as a human actually, so because I am more complex, does that mean that I am therefore more autonomous? So for example, like, am I more autonomous than a rock or a bacteria? I don't think so. I think actually I am more fragile in some ways. Like, without oxygen, I'm going to die very, very quickly. So I don't think that now I am perhaps more autonomous in the sense that my complex structure affords me a kind of ability to move about the world and make decisions in a way that a tree can't. And even perhaps at a spiritual level, like, I could translate the more I can see and feel and understand from a spiritual perspective probably affords me a kind of option and freedom that I just wouldn't be able to recognize.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, in that way, I can see I imagine that's what he's trying to point to. And yet also I'm just aware of the way that that's also not true at many other levels as well. And it seems to be coming from a humanistic perspective as opposed to something that is universally true across all of reality.
Mm-hmm.
And his last one is that there is increasing teleos. So each holon is each holon is drawn toward its own next wholeness. So in a sense, we are trying to evolve into something greater than we are inherently drawn towards something greater than ourselves, which yes, of course, from one perspective can be felt to be true, And from another, it's all already whole and complete and perfect the way it is. So that was a lot. So I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious how this whole project of Wilber's strikes you, or if there's anything that's coming to mind.
I think as a whole, so I don't take Wilber as the final authority for what is true.
Sure.
It's another model or way of seeing and understanding what his experience has been and how he sees the world. It makes sense how he is coming to his conclusions. I think ultimately his gift in this framework is giving us a practice to refuse or to practice refusing reductionism.
Mm-hmm. Like getting too caught in a box or in a particular way of seeing things.
Yeah, just being able to acknowledge and hold that science sees things from one perspective. Spiritually minded people are going to see things from another perspective. Psychologists are going to see things from a perspective. Our body knows something, community knows, and each of these don't necessarily possess the whole.
Do you think anything can?
That is the question of mystic saints and sinners.
Yeah. So it's more like the act of engaging with that question is the the thing.
Wilber is giving the invitation to wrestle with all the parts. And to find out that your arms are not big enough to physically get around them in the end.
Yeah, I notice the way in which, I have this pretty persistent critic inside of me that wants to very cleanly decide, well, that thing is right and that thing is wrong, and this part should be preserved and then that part should be thrown away. And that discernment is absolutely necessary in some ways, and it can also be used, like there's a way in which it can be enacted that's kind of shitty and sharp and it's just unnecessarily so. And so I noticed myself falling into that a lot when I was feeling through, like I was reacting to some of his claims. Oh, Howard, he's such an idiot. I'm like, okay, whoa, let's rein it in.
Yeah, he's giving another way to experience that the map is never the territory. And the invitation is not to find the perfect map and to feel into the wisdom that there is someone doing the mapping in our experience, and that's us.
Well, I appreciate the way that you delight in my philosophical mutterings and questioning, and you've always been a good partner with me in things like this. It means a lot to me because
in the classic work by John Bunyan, Pilgrim's Progress, Pilgrim has a saying when he is with the porter that let's spend the evening in spiritual conversation. And that's just simply inquiry about the map and how we're seeing the map.
Yeah. Because there's a way in which I can think about this alone, which is an important part of my process to be able to do and to wrestle with it myself. But then I also need to wrestle with it with you or with others in a wider conversation. Because then I always end up seeing something more that I didn't before. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Which of Wilber's books do you recommend as we wrap things up today?
Oh my goodness.
His most recent book, he does a good job of going back through each of his, I would say, works and giving a definition of what has come before to build on where he is.
Yeah. Finding Radical Wholeness, the integral path to unity, growth, and delight.
Highly recommended.
The very first book of his that I read was Spectrum of Consciousness, which I think is also a good, they're all fantastic. You're right in that one is a good synthesis of a lot of what has come before. But I think Spectrum of Consciousness is my favorite book of his. It took me a year to read through, but I was doing it very in the same way that I was engaging with these Holons. Like I would read a chapter and then, or part of, I'd read a page and then I'd have all kinds of feel like, wait a minute, what is, and then I'd have to kind of think about it and just marinate on it for a day or two. So it's not a very big book and it took me a year. So yeah, that one's great. Do you have a favorite of his?
Probably his most recent.
His most recent one?
Yeah. I love his lines, waking up, growing up, cleaning up, showing up, and opening up as a progress for life.
All very important.
Thanks, folks, for joining us today.
Yes. Thank you for listening and being here.
Until next time.
We will see you then.
Bye-bye for now.
Goodbye.